Hey everyone, so this is a little review on type some things that I think you should keep in mind before we get going. So I'm sharing my computer screen with you. So I have several PDFs here, and I'm gonna make these available to you so you can review these if you want to use them as shortcuts. One of the things that I wanted to say in terms of the class was that this first project uh, sort of demands of you to get comfortable with the software, particularly in design, and in terms of how to deal with typing in design. I don't know, some of you may have experience, some of you may not. Some of you may want some tricks and shortcuts, and I'll do another video to show you some sort of things I do to set up files and so forth and so on, give you good practices. The other thing I wanted to cover in this briefly was that there's some assignments, particularly the first few weeks, where I'm giving you some reading, some theory that can help you contextualize typography, that can help you to gain your own perspective on typography. And some of these are sort of readings that are very, you would consider traditional in terms of the practice of typography. So for example, I'm asking you to take a look at The Typography of Order by Emil Reuter and The Crystal Goblet by Beatrice Wardle, which are, the Crystal Goblet is certainly an essay that you should encounter in typography. It's one of the sort of most discussed pieces of writing about typography, and she wrote it in the 20s or 30s in terms of what typography is, what typographers do, typographers at that time, not designers. And it's good to start thinking about what we do today as a designer or a typographer. Reuter is Swiss and is one of the key sort of proponents of modern typography, sort of thinking of it in a systematic way, grids, international style, which you might encounter that terminology. So they're good essays to start thinking. The Reuter essay also really gives a lot of sort of like practices. I don't call them rules, but he sort of says, this is what you do, this is what makes something legible, this is what does not make it legible. So let me get going with these two handouts that I have here. And I'm going to start with this classification. So I want you to start thinking about the different forms of letter forms. So for example, we have, basically there's three letter forms. So there's the serifs, which are considered the more classic, right? Come from Trajan, start getting mutated primarily through England, France, and Italy. So for example, you have Caslon, designed by William Caslon in England. You have Baskerville, which is also British. Then you have Bodoni, which is Italian. And one that's not here is Dido, which a lot of you might have seen. A lot of fashion magazines use Dido. Serifs, of course, are those little cuts at the end of the edges of the letters. You'll see it there. You start to see that. At the turn of the sort of around 1900s, all of a sudden sans serif started to show up, particularly in Switzerland. Caslon actually did a sans serif back in the mid 1800s, which was rejected for looking odd, weird. But the Swiss started going in this direction, Swiss and Germany in particular, where you can argue that the sans serifs, the serifs have been cut. So things like universe, you will see Helvetica is probably the most famous sans serif, the most famous and probably the most overused. You also start looking at Clarendon, so this is considered a slab serif, very popular in America, in the United States. And then you start getting things like more display, what we would call display, typefaces that are really only good in large sizes. Something like a brush script or handwriting, rosewood decorative typeface. Usually a very good, what we call workhorse typeface, that's a sans serif and a serif, works very well for body copy. That means small copy text and display large sizes, right? Body copy usually somewhere between 8 and 12. A lot of people use 12 points, which is sort of the generic standard primarily set by Microsoft. It's the standard that when you open up Microsoft Word, it starts at 12 points. A lot of more contemporary designers, we tend to go smaller sizes. A very good typeface can go 8, 9, 10 points if you set it very well, right? So you start thinking of these typefaces also as families, right? So here's a family of Caslon, and here's Universe. Universe was one of the first typefaces that had a very, very large, broad system of weights. But it's the same typeface in different weights, different thicknesses to allow for maximum use. So the more your typeface family has, the more you can do with it, right? That's the idea. So that's on type classification. Several things that I want you to be aware. So I'm going to move to the type basics, and you see there's other stuff back there, and I'm going to make another video to show you that, is anatomy of type. I want you to be aware of it. You're going to cover some of this by your reading in the Ellen Lupton book. So you want to start looking at the anatomy of type and start thinking about how all these letter parts come together and their use of space, how tight or loose things are, and what allows for readability, right? If letters are too tight, can you read it? If they're too loose, can you make a sense of the sentence or the thought being expressed in the particular sentence or the particular phrase? So you start thinking, for example, baseline, which is this line where the letters sit. You have a descender. Notice that the descender comes below that line, and then you have an ascender, which goes above what you consider this sort of upper line up here, right? The cap height is the height of a capital letter. Usually these measurements are based on letter X. And then there's the X height, which is the measurement of the lowercase letter. You have the serifs at the end. If you have a serif face, if you don't, if you have a sans serif, you notice that there'll be no serifs. They don't look like those little knives. You have the stem of the letter, which is sort of this base, root base. You'll see it on the P here as well, right? You have the counter, the letters that have those spaces within them, the P, the lowercase a, the O, the D in particular. The bowl, which is this sort of curvy form on the A. You also see that on the B, right? So I want you to start thinking how this anatomy of type helps a reader or somebody who's engaging with your work, how that anatomy informs what is being said. So with that also being said, you also start thinking about, wait, if there are many type families, there are many typefaces, what does each typeface express? What is the idea that a type designer has used to generate a particular typeface? There's, at this point, hundreds of thousands of typefaces, okay? So you want to start thinking, the typeface you select, what does that mean? For the first project, I'm selecting a typeface for you, and you can only use that one weight of it. So I'm challenging you in terms of creating a hierarchy and creating a specific idea using very limited resources, which is something that a methodology that I think is really important for you to work with is limitations. A lot of what we do a lot of the times is limited resources, or a client, if you're working with a client, says to you, the budget is only this, so you can only use this. So you want to start thinking in that direction. Some other things in this handout, you want to start looking at the lowercase letters. Notice how they sit on the baseline. The uppercase take the entire height, right? Look at the Q in this case, right? Small caps, true small caps, not fake small caps, right? So any good typeface has true small caps, which the type designer has actually designed, so they proportionally feel like part of the family, rather than a gigantic uppercase letter that you actually reduced, right? Sometimes you have to do that. Aligning figures, which are larger, and then the old style, which the descenders dip down, and these tend to be the ones that you find in classical textbooks a lot. You have ligatures, which is when two or more letter forms are joined with a single glyph. FF, FI, FL are the very traditional glyphs that you would find in most typefaces. And you want to turn these on in InDesign because you want that. That is well-set typography does this, okay? Want you to be aware of how you use hyphens, N-dash and M-dash, right? Hyphen is that little key next to the zero. Then you have the N-dash, which is what you should use when you have lists like 2007 to 2008, 830 to 120. Not the hyphen. Notice you use it on the phone. A lot of people sometimes use the N-dash on the phone as well. The hyphen is also used when you are breaking a word up. And then the M-dash, which is a really long one, which you use when you're trying to break up a thought within a sentence. You use that, and notice that there's no space before or after the dash, the M-dash. So hyphen, N-dash, and M-dash. Smart quotes, or dumb quotes, and people call them, these are smart quotes. Any good typeface in the serifs, the quotes curl. In sans serifs, they tend to be at an angle. Otherwise, you end up with hatch marks, right? Which are really feet and inch marks. A true ellipses, 3 dots, is not going to the period 1, 2, 3. It's actually 3 dots. You also want to start thinking of tracking, kerning, and leading, right? So this is about the space of the letters, the space between the letters, the space between the words, and the general space between the lines. And how does that space help you to create clear communication, right? If the space is too tight, it's difficult for the reader to read. If it's too loose, maybe you lose the thought. So you want to start training your eye to look at those details. So for example, tracking or letter spacing is the horizontal space between letters, right? So this is usually done in body copy, okay? Tracking or letter spacing. Kerning is the spacing between individual pairs of letters, which is usually done when you have display copy. For example, this body parts, that needs to be kerned. Body copy, you wouldn't kern, because kerning is about putting the cursor in between each letter and actually manually maneuvering the space to create an even sense within the whole line. For example, very good kerning. Leading is the space in between the lines of type, okay? And the term leading refers to the strips of lead used to separate lines of metal type in letterpress printing. Think about it, what happens if your leading is too tight? The letters will start crashing from one line to the other. And what does that do to the reader, right, when you're reading? And again, the same thing if it's too loose, right? What happens? So usually you're trying to go for comfortable leading that the reader can actually follow the lines and the thought within the sentence. So this is just some type basics, the first part, and then I'm going to do another one, another video to help you, and I'll give you some notes that I hand wrote, and I'll get those to you as well. Okay, so I will see you in the next video.